can I invite our respondents, Sandra, Johanne Selander, and Andrea Kahn, to take a seat, and Dirk to take one other seat. Is this? So I would like to invite our two new people on the stage, who are Sandra Johanne Selander, who is an environmental scientist with a master's in strategic environmental management from Lund University. So you're from here. And you are currently the climate and energy strategist for Länsstyrelsen, Skåne, which is the county administration or administrative board of Scania, which is responsible for ensuring that decisions from the parliament and the government are implemented in the county, so in this region here, and that the efforts are coordinated. The objective here in Sweden is concerning energy transition to increase the share of renewable energy in the county, and especially regarding efforts to achieve good planning conditions within the national planning framework for wind power. So Sandra is also the chairman of such a board for the Vindkraftsakademien, which is an association working on that topic. Andrea Kahn, who's with us here, is the founder of Design Content, which is a company also, and brings over 35 years of research and teaching experience to her consultancy practice, where she offers strategic communication, collaboration, and process support for complex design and planning projects. And she's currently at SLU with us as an adjunct professor of site thinking, research, and practice. I will not go on too long about your previous commitments in different fields of the society, but I would like to let you have a say, a question, a comment on what you heard from Dirk about the Netherlands strategies and also the interplay of, let's say, design, statistics in some parts, but also most interesting policy and politicians, as you have explained, Dirk. And I will switch the microphone when you need it to Andrea and also to you at the audience, because we will not have so much time to discuss, but I think everyone who wants to have a question to Dirk too is warmly invited to raise a hand, and I will spot you and pass the microphone over. Okay. Sandra, do you want to start?
Maybe I should start. Who's mic'd up? Like, first of all, thank you. It was super inspiring listening to you. And I mean, I'm struck by a lot of, there's a lot of similarities. And I think especially for Skåne as a county, we both are very urbanized and quite densely populated, and of course there's rural areas as well, and we have the whole conflict when it comes to not in my backyard, and this is also where we have a lot of use. We use a lot of energy here, but we don't produce as much energy, and of course I think you touched a bit upon it. There's been a cultural shift maybe since the 50s, when it comes to energy. I mean, you see it very clearly within my field how there's an opposition towards renewables, even though people are well aware of the effects it will have on the landscape and our lives, but we still have a tendency of not in my backyard. So I would be very interested to hear on the cultural approach, how that is in the Netherlands. Maybe have you evaluate a little bit more about that? And I also have to say, it's we in Skåne, or Scania, we were one of the first regions in Sweden that started building wind power. So we have within the next few years, we're in repowering is a way of, making sure that we have more renewable energy production. And as we are also shutting down nuclear power in Sweden, it will affect the national grid. So very inspiring to see how, using the spatial planning and exactly how that was accepted by the people who are affected by this. I would very much like to hear more about. I don't know.
You want to answer to this right away, Dirk?
Yes, I think that Skåne is very comparable to in size and also in urbanization with the Netherlands. So we could learn a lot from each other, and in a way, I think that you can peel off all the fears and objections people have as an onion. There are a lot of layers in this, let's say, opposition.
Yeah.
And what we tried, for instance, was having landscape architects and artists take an angle on this, that it is about the domestication of monsters. And that sounds very strange, but in a way, these are fearsome new elements in our society and our landscape. And there a lot of work in the anthropology has been done on the domestication of monsters. I could show you some examples of that.
Is there a landscape architectural take of that? Do you think of drawing, visualizing, or
there are
knowledge of a site, or
there are, let's say, 4 basic ways to domesticate a monster. One is to banish it, and that is, of course, the North Sea is fantastic to banish your problem to. That is to, let's say, to assimilate the monster. And that is a very, let's say, nuanced way. That is to change the rules upon where you think the criteria in which you call something a monster are changed. And there is, of course, adaptation. And the most spectacular one is the one that is, how do you call it? You hug the monster. You make it into a holy thing. So these 4 different ways give 4 completely different design strategies that, in the end, of course, they don't completely work or sort of mitigate all the resentments against wind turbines, but it is an interesting way of looking at things. But most of all, I think I showed the diagram with the denialists in there. There is, of course, one thing that you cannot reason away, that each and every wind turbine is a monument for the new time. And in a way, it also has that almost it arouses the emotions from people who think this new time, I might lose my privileges here. So it is. So that is the deepest, the inside of the onion. If you peel off all the rational, let's say, the rational reasons to say no to this monster in your backyard, you come to the core of the thing. And that is that people don't want this energy transition. And that is very hard to conquer.
Do you have the same impression from here, around here?
Well, yeah, I mean, just more of a personal than a professional reflection is that I think like the monument of a new time, I think maybe it has to do with the, society in general, like we're more I'm looking forward to the new time in the future. Maybe we're more future optimistic 50 years ago when they were building the power grid, and now we are more. We dream about the old days and preserving, and I think the frame of mind, of course, affects. The culture of course affects the development and how we see. The monument of new time. I think it's interesting.
If you think it's a positive thing, for instance, like in Germany, where all the local communities greatly were affected, but also had their energy bills lowered, they could say, well, these turbines are turning for us. And we in the Netherlands, we have a sort of top-down policies where people could say, you put these windmills there and we are carrying, we have the trouble here. So also that is a great difference of perception of the same phenomenon.
The ownership of
the ownership or the partly ownership of it. It's it's really important.
Yeah. How do you think is the role of spatial planners, landscape architects, designers in general then defined? What sort of motion forward towards a narrative can they deliver, or what sort of argument can they use also in order to convince or the broader public or politicians?
I would say that it boils down, for instance, to are you able to make it into a public space again, a wind turbine park or a solar field or something like that. That's what designers can add. And also, I would say that as sort of we are sort of the generalists in the on the table where a lot of specialists are around, we might be able to link the energy transition to other societal goals, and I think that's a very important addition we can and extra value we can produce.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I could say, but following up on that, I mean, I think you could think about designers or architects, landscape architects, as generalists, or I often think about it in terms of one of the things one learns as an architectural and a landscape architectural designer is how to put things together that were not made to be put together. Mm. So you can think about that in terms of wood and steel have different reactions to heat, and buildings are made of wood and steel together, or concrete and steel, and architects figure out how those two things that were never meant to go together, or they figure out how someone who wants to build something for 100 euros a square foot can actually do that, realistically with materials that cost more. It's like, how do you bring values that are economic together with performances that are material, with understandings of things that decay through time? And it's somehow in your education, it's not only that you're a generalist, but you somehow are asked to put together things that other people don't think would ever fit.
No.
So
the landscape is organic, and these new infrastructure is industrial.
Exactly. And one person says my job is industry, and someone else says my job is agriculture, and the designer can say, oh, you can think those two things together. Mm-hmm. That's the skill I bring. I don't know a lot about agriculture. I don't know a lot about technical, but I know how you might ask a question where both those things would come into play. And I think that's very interesting. Two other maybe just observations. I think what you're providing, not only a national narrative, but politicians, policymakers need stories to tell their constituents in order to get support, in order to do projects. And I think a lot of this kind of research provides stories for politicians to tell other politicians, or people that are in power, to continue to be given that power to do things. And I think this kind of work is important for that as well. And the third thing I thought about was how, interestingly, the questions you asked, which landscapes are fit, where can solar go? I mean, there's spatial questions, there are also locational questions, and spatial and locational questions aren't exactly the same.
Oh.
And then there are questions of character. What fits? What already has qualities that can be optimized? How do you allow things to do double duty? And I think the notion of geothermal or heat exchange or having solving an agricultural problem with an energy solution, this is ultimately what we need to do. And that's a very urban approach to landscape, because we think about our landscapes as being single use. That's a field, that's a park, that's water. And cities have always been multi-use spaces. In the same physical location, many, many different things go on. And I think we're starting to talk about how to imagine our rural landscape as performing the way we expect our cities, and our cities have worked. Doing more things
observation.
More than one thing at a time.
Yeah, maybe even when you showed this example of the, I think it was a heat production unit wonderfully designed by an architect, a Dutch architect, which is a building, of course, and it sits somewhere, probably in a broad, open, not very much built up landscape. So it again kind of brings together categories that were not necessarily been together. And I think if you even extrapolate that into a time frame where what we might want to think of the modern epoch of singling out everything and functionalizing everything, and then a post-modern, or even whatever we call it now, epoch where we almost come back to pre-modern times where things were much more multifunctional, much more multi-use than we have made them over 20th century.
Yeah.
So
and low tech sometimes. Yeah.
Very low tech, but also that the landscape is, as you call it in your title, it's not a backdrop or just a landing field for such things, but it could be an actor promoting actively with the profession that is belonging to it, landscape architects or spatial designers, to forward these things and maybe make it visually quite bold or appealing, or also talk often enough of it, so that these images get into people's minds.
And I think that is also a contribution that we should, let's say, focus on. You are all from the university here, and I think that one of the most important contributions we make is that research by design. This was all research by design projects funded in very different ways, sometimes with the university in a very important role. These are things that never are going to have a client. And we are, as a community of the university, the only persons that sort of have the position to do this research and show it to, well, the politicians or the policy makers or the technicians, etc., etc. Because it's never going, the North Sea as a whole is never going to have one client. You have to do that. That's our power. That's what we can add. And I think it's very important.
So I think this is also an invitation, I think, to those of you who are here, teachers or researchers, to think of such approaches and your power in that, and you others who are here, students, to tell the university you want that. So I think there's both sides to it, and it can start both sides. Are there any questions in the audience? Then I'll just take this micro, if you are okay with giving the word to the audience. I think he was.
I'm Alexander. You touched briefly on there being commercial payback to German people living closer to wind turbine.
Yeah.
That seems like that would entirely solve the not in my backyard situation. Because in any other country, there is no direct individual benefit to living close to wind turbine. Mm-hmm. But then you have that, and then you solve the... Has that been used anywhere else?
In Denmark, there is, for instance, legislation that you have to compensate. Yeah, but we have a different legislation in Sweden.
And I think it's even important to, in these large-scale offshore projects, to have participation of citizens investing in that. You have to make these links not only for the banks or the large pension funds, but also for individual citizens to make them a part of the transition also in a financial way.
Hi, my name is Martin and I work as a landscape architect here in Malmö. I have a question regarding when you come to apply these ideas, this approach, and you talk to politicians, different people, you show in the image different authorities from different sectors. How do you make them understand these ideas? And even though maybe there are some authorities that are maybe not that interested, so how does it come when you collaborate with these different actors? What is your experience?
Well, in a way, it is very important to have something like a biennale or an international congress or something like that, that it offers you a platform to invite all these people that might on their own not meet each other or come into a discussion. And then in this, let's say, wonderful platform as the biennale, normal policy problems can take what you could call a sabbatical detour. In a way, you can invite people in a safe cultural space of a biennale, so they're not being, let's say, shot off directly when they say something wrong or something that their boss doesn't agree with. So you have to create this safe space and then invite everybody. And like I showed, the snowball effect of the Odyssey in the making went much far further than the organizations we invited. They rang us to be able to be part of this whole event. So that is how it could work. Creating a safe space and then inviting everybody. And the safe space could also be a university or a university congress. It doesn't have to be something big as a biennale.
And I think your timeline was quite obvious also in that respect, where you showed where the first Rotterdam Biennial happened, then you had a study made, then the second Rotterdam Biennial was happening, and then there was this declaration of interest of North Sea country neighbors. I think Andrea wants to.
It's always cumulative. But I think the question's interesting because it has to do with the relationship between communication and education and providing people with ways to understand both complex problems and begin to be comfortable with maybe the end game isn't solving the problem. A wicked problem is not solvable, but it's constantly a question of framing it in new ways and incrementally, as you're saying, kind of how do we pragmatically keep moving towards a better situation? Right. And I think what we have as a long shadow of modernist habit of mind is science articulates a problem, then they have to solve the problem, then it's done, now there's another problem. And what the another huge sociocultural and narrative shift is, these are not solvable problems, but they're manageable, and management can go very, very far. And we don't know in the end, as we manage, what kind of new landscapes we're going to produce. But the shift to even becoming comfortable with it's not solvable, and that is not a problem.
Yeah.
Right?
that is learning to ride the tiger in a way.
Yeah.
And instead of give us a problem and we're going to solve it.
That to me is that's another piece of the communication, right? Of really changing the terms of how the discussion even is.
Yeah, how the legislation works. Yes, to say,
that's a question for you. Like, are there conversations happening in policy where people are not saying we have to solve this, but how do we address it? How do we move it forward?
I have another question from the audience.
Yes, our kind of audience. I'm. My name is Josephine. I also work with the platform SLU Urban Futures. So before I joined SLU, 1.5 years ago, I worked for 10 years at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, and I was teaching 2 programs. One program of energy and sustainability engineers, and one program of architects and planners who wanted to work on sustainable urban development. And it was striking that both of these programs had like inter and cross-disciplinary ambitions, but the energy and environment students never touched upon planning or spatial aspects of energy or the environment, but learned this through the reductionistic approaches of natural sciences mainly. And the planning and design students never discussed energy apart from as something that could be addressed through working with mobility as service or energy efficient insulation materials, etc., etc. So my question is, I think primarily to you, Sandra. You're working now in practice trying to make Skåne an energy and climate efficient, sustainable, desirable. I don't know what word you would like to put in relation to that region. But what are the possibilities for you to work across disciplines and across practices? Could you see yourself doing the kind of work that Dirk described? And if not, what would it take from universities, from Länsstyrelsen, from Energimyndigheten, for that to happen?
Well, the funny thing is that we're actually right now trying to do something similar, but we are very much, scientists, and we don't have the fancy architectural programs. So it's very much based on like geese and other measurements. So, but yeah, I mean, you need a mix of people and competences and different to solve this or to manage it. And I agree on that. Like, it can be very straight lines, that like don't talk to each other. And I think like maybe like this platform that you have here is an opportunity to like talk across the different areas, and personally I've always had an interest in urban planning and other stuff, so I might not be a completely straightforward environmental scientist, but it is important. Like, just I think we both need the generalists and the specialists, and we need different types of specialists to solve it and to talk to each other. And I think it's like, as new students, it's important to look outside your own box.
I have one other question from the audience, Andrea, and then I think I need to look at the time.
I'm Flora. I just recently moved to Sweden. I've been working with the Hong Kong Green Building Council for 7 years, but mostly more on administrative. But I really enjoyed the presentation tonight. Thank you, Dirk, so much. And of course, I think I really like the whole plan, and it's really good that like finally we have something not as gloomy, because the whole since this year I think we have got all these really depressing news. But then my thing is, I think like you also mentioned at almost the end of your presentation that the Germans work because there's the bottom-up approach. And obviously this sort of grand plan needs a more top-down approach. So I just want to know, like, how given that we really need to move quick and fast, and bottom up may not really be that fast enough. But like just taking about the North Sea example, I would imagine that, well, it seems really great and maybe the politicians are buying in. But then, like, as you mentioned, to put North Sea as a no fishing zone, I can imagine there will be the strong lobby from the fishery. So how do you really manage all these? So I'm just interesting to know, how do we make it like work as a top down receiving, and at the same time we are moving fast enough? Thank you.
That's a very good question. And what I forgot to tell you is that, in a way, making a sort of national vision for the energy transition in itself is a little bit polemic, because after 25 years of solid neoliberalism in the Netherlands, we sort of, and it sounds very strange, but we dropped this vase of our planning tradition, in a way, and it is in 1,000 fragments on the floor, and people are, and that's the polemic side of making a national vision again, are trusting too much on that everything is going to be solved bottom up, because in a way, for instance, the heat pumps that are an important element in our heat production strategy. If, for instance, everyone in the province of South Holland is, well, going to have a heat pump, we calculated that we need 2,000 wind turbines of the largest model to provide the electricity for the heat pumps alone. So there is a sort of trade-off, and what we said, for instance, was that government should not think that in every block you can make a separate and very democratic bottom-up decision of what kind of heat you want. You also must have a collective system, and if you have a collective system, there is to be a government that says we have to go that way. And here we have to go that way, etc., etc. So we don't believe in top-down planning as little as you do, but to make a map like that and show what it takes was polemic to get our politicians who decentralized everything again to their responsibility at a national or a provincial level. There has to be a political debate and instruments there too. So thank you for your question.
I would like to comment that. Then you first. You had no, because I'm just thinking that is the difference between the Netherlands and Sweden. A lot of the reductions we had in greenhouse gases and emissions in Sweden the last like 20 years has been actually thanks to district heating, that we have a centralized district heating systems. But right now, and that have been able to, well, first of all, take away all the oil that we were used to heating our housing or our buildings. But now we also see a shift that we have more and more heat pumps, which of course increases the amount of electricity, which our system right now is kind of sensitive to. So it's a like you can build yourself into a problem. We have a lot of things to thank for the district heating, but not far from here, we can see the heat power plants that burns garbage and produce our heat in this city. Yeah. So, and also electricity is very cheap in Sweden. So like the energy companies, they mainly make money from the heating. And of course, when the heating is expensive, then as a house owner, I don't mind buying a heat pump. Yeah. So, it needs some direction from where we're going.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you had something.
Yes, I have a question. My name is Monica Gora, and I live here in Malmö. I'm a landscape architect and artist. And it was a fantastic presentation also that it was so condensed and it was so accurate. And I was struck by the 5% animals, wild animals.
Yes.
And I thought your question about fishing was, because I was just also thinking it has to be some fun aspects of the future also, and not just surviving. So it's maybe like all those wild animals is something really interesting to have around. So I was wondering, how would you stop fishing? And it's, of course, it's regulation, but it's maybe also a way of guarding this area, so that those towers would be maybe some sort of post. And maybe also on land, it was really interesting to make those spaces into public spaces and maybe wildlife spaces. So it really opens up for a lot of really nice possibilities.
And a consolation thought is maybe that these were the land mammals. There's not the fishes included. But if you look at a infographic like that, and I get my fun in life out of making infographics, that's one of the nicest things there is, that one glance at an infographic like that gives you the idea that eating meat might not be a fantastic idea when we are trying to touch 10 billion inhabitants of this planet, because you see how much it takes. That I think 1 kilogram of let's say meat from a cow takes 15 kilograms of plant proteins. So there is this conversion from one type of protein to the other that is impossible to sustain with the kind of inhabitants we are going to touch on this world.
Yeah, I think the attractive aspect of it, which you pointed, I think is also an important one in order to empower people's imagination, not only the fear, but maybe also the
fun side of it. Yeah,
moving forward, going into some other future, but not only because one wants to prevent hell, but because one wants to go towards something more paradise-like or so.
Yeah,
I think that's a narrative once again.
Absolutely, it's a narrative, and that's. I mean, we have last year there were 3 wolves in the Netherlands. Three wolves, and they were back. I think the last wolf was shot in 1867 or so. So there's a sort of rewilding of Europe going on that makes me very enthusiastic. But in a way, there was already from all the provinces of the east of the Netherlands, they were talking about how are we going to manage this problem, and the plans to shoot them down as soon as they bite one sheep. And well, the problem, of course, is that I think almost 700 sheep are killed by dogs every year. So you have to make this rewilding also into something to be welcomed. That we share this planet with other living beings, and that the comeback of the wolf is something to celebrate instead of making the hunters going to hunt them down. So there are always these two sides of looking at the dominant position we as humans have, and allowing other. That's what I like about urban nature too. That and urban ecologists that point us on how also we don't, there are 300,000 people living in Malmö, I was informed, but I think there will be 30 billion inhabitants of Malmö if you look at the other species that are around here. The fun side of nature, and not only making people scared of what you see in the infographic, is also very important.
Thank you, Dirk. And I think, looking at time, I would like to slightly close our panel, unless you have a very last comment, any of you or in the audience. Because I think we are quite filled up with new information, a lot, causalities a lot, but also ideas how we can go about it.
Mm-hmm.
And also encourage to maybe search for even more opportunities to create alliances or foster those networks that we, I think, need very heavily, and to nurture new narratives.
Yeah, and my apologies that I overstepped my boundaries in time. I have a sort
very
of
much worth it.
Fidel Castro kind of DNA that makes me do lectures of hours and hours and hours, and I'm sorry for that.
Please give Dirk a big hand, and I think then we move on. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.